Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. So as a philosopher, whenever we tell people what we work on, in my case, perception, we're sometimes asked this question: what is philosophy, or what does philosophy do? And for a philosopher, this is a difficult question, and it's a difficult question for two reasons. One reason is that as a philosopher, you could be working on any number of things. I work on perception, but you might also be working on logic, or you might be working on law. So it's hard to give a single unified answer. On the other hand, the question itself is a philosophical question. So in this popular podcast, Philosophy Bites, 50 philosophers were asked the question, and they gave mostly distinct answers. And now, despite the fact that it's very hard for us philosophers to define this question, or to answer this question, it's certainly the case that for most people, when they think of philosophy, they think of a discipline that's focused on the past, on the works and ideas of mostly dead figures like Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, or Kant. Now, I don't want to say that philosophy is not concerned with the past, nor do I want to say that, nor do I want to give a new definition of philosophy. But here's what I want to point out. I want to point out that a fundamental task that philosophy performs for the human race is that it prepares us for the future. Philosophy is fundamentally future-oriented. So let me make this case for you. And let's start with this metaphor, and the metaphor is using a business. So businesses are these very popular collective enterprises that we see today, and in the functioning of good businesses, we see there's a division of labor that different parts of the company are doing different things for this company. So, for instance, we might have the marketing department, which is paying attention to the image of the company, and we might have the finance department keeping track of the assets and the expenses of this company. But now, what I want to draw your attention to is this particular department, which is the Research and Development Unit, and I want to draw your attention to what this department does. Now, in many big successful businesses, you have a Research and Development Unit, and here's what it does. It's mostly not doing the same thing that these other departments are doing. It doesn't very often produce concrete products. Rather, what it does is that it comes up with new ideas for products, services, procedures that the company may or may not use sometime in the future. And now what I want to say is that the function of the Research and Development Unit in the business is analogous to the function of philosophy for the human race. What philosophy does is that it prepares the ground for the future, much in the same way that the Research and Development Unit does. So, look, humans have been trying to categorize and understand their reality as far back as we can go. And throughout this whole time, we see philosophy engaged in these always very abstract, seemingly unanswerable questions. So the questions look like this. You might ask, what is human nature? What is the nature of reality? What's the right thing to do? And all of these look like they're very difficult questions, maybe unanswerable questions. But now, if you take a look more closely at these questions and the concepts that emerged out of these questions, a very different picture starts to emerge. So let me just give you a few examples. In ancient Greece, Aristotle raised questions about the nature of organisms and species. In the medieval Islamic period, Ibn Sina raised questions about the relation between the mind and the body. In the 17th century, John Locke was raising questions about the nature of property and what it means to have rights. And in the 20th century, Simone de Beauvoir raised the question of what it means to be a woman. Now, when you look at these questions and you consider how readily you recognize the concepts that these questions talk about, and also how readily we recognize to what extent these concepts are formative for culture today, whether in politics, art, and science, you start to see a different picture of philosophy. The picture is this. What philosophy is doing is that it's paving a path to the future with questions that the human race is not able to deal with in a more concrete way at the moment. So Aristotle didn't have, a microscope, but he was nevertheless addressing these questions and preparing the ground for biology to emerge in one of these days. Okay. Let me give you two more recent and concrete examples to make this case even more strongly. At the beginning, or sometime in the 20th century, not at the beginning of it, but in the 20th century, this philosopher, Philippa Foot, in ethics, raised this problem. It's a hypothetical situation called the trolley problem. And here's what the trolley problem says. It says, imagine that there's a train, and this train is going on its path, but the path splits. And here's what's happening. If you do nothing at all, this train will drive by, and it's going to kill 5 people. But here's the situation. You're next to a switch, and you can press this switch, and by doing so, you can divert the path of the train, and so kill 1 person instead. And the question is, what's the right thing to do? And this is a hard case because it raises questions about the difference between letting die and killing, about the value of human life, whether we should value 5 over 1. Sure enough, you know, at the time that this problem was raised, many people said, look, this is a very abstract problem, you know, why do we even care about this problem? And now, look, I want to just point out that this problem has re-emerged in technology today. So today, one of our recent technologies is these self-driving cars. And these self-driving cars, they're very good at not making accidents, much better than we are, but in some situations, they have to have an accident, right? The street might just be in a situation where you have to have an accident. So now imagine you and your family have bought one of these cars, and then there's another individual in their car, and now these cars are going to have an accident. So what should the cars do? Should the car favor its owner? Or should the car favor the majority? Or should the car favor letting die over killing? This is a problem that we need to legislate for legally before we're able to have these cars out on the street. So here's a philosophical problem raised about 100 years ago that now becomes a concrete problem for us today. Let me give you another example which goes back even further. So in the 17th century, René Descartes raised this also very abstract seeming question. He said, look, what do I know? Okay, and he raised this possibility. He said, look, what if my world is governed by an evil demon that tries to deceive me by creating an artificial reality that looks like this one? And now the question is, what can I know in that context? Again, seems like an extremely abstract problem and doesn't seem like you need to answer it immediately. But when we look at technology today, we see this new type of technology, virtual reality technology. And in fact, this technology is raising many of the same problems that Descartes was interested back in the 17th century. So consider this question, is a virtual object the same as a real object? Now you might be like, why do I need to answer this? Well, here's why you need to answer this, because a lot of the legislation will turn on this question. For instance, should you have a virtual education or should you not have a virtual education? Well, this partly depends on what the value of a virtual education is going to be, which is partly going to be determined by how real that reality is. So here you have another case where philosophy deals with a question way ahead of the time where we were able to deal with it concretely. Okay, so look, I hope that by going through these two cases with you, I've convinced you that there's at least a fundamental part of philosophy that's about the future. Philosophy might look to the past, but it looks to the past because the philosophers of the past were already looking to the future. And now I just want to wrap up with a quick comment about us here today. Look, whether you identify as Lebanese or Middle Eastern or Arab, I hope that you can see that we need philosophy today more than ever. Philosophy prepares a path for the future, and if there's one thing that we're missing today in this part of the world, it's a path forward to the future. Thank you.